Good morning, everyone. Wasn't that the best flash mob you ever saw? It's fantastic. I think that deserves another round of applause. What do you think? It was a great privilege for me to speak last year at the inaugural Respond conference, an even greater privilege to be invited back a second time. So thanks to Dave and John and Susan and all the other organisers. And I can remember leaving last year really energised by all the enthusiasm that I met. And I'm getting a sense already, and it's only 9:30, that this conference is going to exceed that again, just based on what we saw. So fantastic. I'm going to talk to you about the One Life project. Martin mentioned that this is a project that the National Ambulance Service have just launched in the last 2 weeks within the service to try and improve cardiac arrest outcomes. So the next 10 or 15 minutes, I'm just going to run through that and just tell you a little bit what we have in mind. This community, I think, is an integral part of it, and I'm interested in your thoughts and any suggestions or ideas that you might have. I'm a little nervous, actually. That's the only thing I have to say before I start, because a couple of years ago at a conference, I played a mean trick on Bridget when she was giving a talk. And I've just got a sneaking suspicion that it might be payback time today. So be gentle, Bridget, okay? Okay, so I'm sure many of you will be familiar with our service, but just for those of you who are not, just a very brief overview. We are the National Ambulance Service for Ireland. We provide ambulance services for the Republic of Ireland, and in Dublin, in conjunction with our colleagues in Dublin Fire Brigade. We do 325,000 calls every year. That's going up by about 6.5% every year, so a big increase in demand year on year. But over 700 999 calls every 24 hours. So between now and tomorrow morning, we will have 700 999 calls, of which about 2% of those are cardiac arrests. We do 20 million kilometres every year doing that, and again, that's going up. And we do that with 1,600 frontline staff, paramedics, advanced paramedics, EMTs, and our staff in our control centres from 100 ambulance stations, and that'll probably be 102 actually. We have 2 new ambulance stations coming online in the west very soon. Dedicated HEMS aircraft that Martin mentioned that we operate in conjunction with the Irish Air Corps, and then 4 Irish Coast Guard search and rescue helicopters also available to us on an as-available basis. And that's how we discharge our responsibility to the people of Ireland to be there for them when they need us. Statistically, everyone in Ireland will probably have one interaction with the emergency services in their lifetime. So we are there literally for everyone. So what's the problem? Out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. So, what actually is the issue for us? We know it's about 2% of our 999 call volume, but, can we dive into that? Can we dissect it down a little bit more? Well, thankfully we can, and that's largely because of the out-of-hospital cardiac arrest registry, which again, many of you will be familiar with. This was established, I think in 2006 by PHECC, which I think was a very far-sighted decision on their part, and it rolled out starting in the northwest and took in phased basis until we got national coverage. And what that gives us is it gives us very detailed information on out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, and it allows us to define the problem, and then when we're looking at trying to improve what we're doing, you can't change anything unless you're measuring it. So this is our mechanism for measuring what we do, and if we change something, looking to see what effect that might have. And it's an enormously useful tool and an integral part of what we're doing with this problem. So just to give you some idea, and we won't get too bogged down in the statistics, but just that's a snapshot of cardiac arrest in Ireland today, based on data from OHCA. We do 1,800 a year, and that's defined as where resuscitation is commenced. Okay, we don't count cardiac arrest where someone is found and who's clearly dead, and we don't commence resuscitation. And all those figures there are broadly speaking in line with international data. The one in red is the disappointing one. So if you have a cardiac arrest today, your chances of surviving that and leaving hospital neurologically intact, carrying your own suitcase, is about 5%. And that's, it's not the worst in the world. It certainly wouldn't be the best. That's something that we need to do. We need to work on. That's some data from OHCA, just to give you a sense of where it happens. The red dots are those cardiac arrests that are that occur in urban situations, and the green dots occur in rural situations. So there's a spread that you would expect. Lots of red dots in our big urban settings, and then a scattering all over Ireland. And that's important because, in terms of a speedy response and getting hands on chest and getting an early defibrillation, the stark reality is it's going to be a lot easier to do that in an urban setting rather than a rural setting. Unless, of course, you've got a good community first responder system in that rural setting. So we asked ourselves the question, in terms of out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, we as the National Ambulance Service, what can we do better? Is there something we can do to affect this? And to answer that question, we've devised what we were calling the One Life Project, and that's an internal project within the National Ambulance Service, and it's a quality improvement program aimed, it's got one aim, improving the outcome from out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. We want to get more people resuscitated successfully, and more people home, return to their families, return to their communities, return to their society, functioning and neurologically intact. So that's the One Life Project. Probably 2 years in the making. David Henley, who's our clinical development manager who works with me in the medical directorate, is the project manager for it, and he and many others have made a huge contribution to this. And we now have a roadmap and a plan of how we're going to tackle this over the next years, and a number of years, and it's a multi-annual plan. It's going to take us 3, 4, 5 years to get where we want to be. What did we do? We took a cardiac arrest, and what I describe as the anatomy of a cardiac arrest, and I know some of my colleagues from our control centre in Tal are going to talk about this later on, which I think will be interesting for you. But we took a cardiac arrest, and we from the moment the person collapses to when we get them to the door of the emergency department, and we mapped out every single step, and there are hundreds of different individual things that happen all along the way, from the phone call, from the call connecting into our control centre, the questions that we use to identify it, what we do at a control level when we identify it's a cardiac arrest in terms of giving instructions to the caller, the vehicles we dispatch, down to what happens when we get on scene, what our crews do and our responders do, and things, communicating with the emergency department. There are hundreds and hundreds of steps, and we looked at each one of those and we decided, is there something here that we can do better? Is there somewhere on this particular step that we can improve? And the idea being that all of those small cumulative improvements will hopefully result in a better outcome for the patient, and that's part of the process. But we've arrived at this. Which is our performance improvement plan, which we're going to use now as a roadmap, and that's got hundreds of different items in it that are going to take us 2, 3, 4 years. We're going to focus in particular areas, and with the aim of improving outcomes from cardiac arrest and getting more people back to their families alive and neurologically intact. So they're just some of the areas that we're going to focus on, and I think the one that's relevant today for you and for this group is that one, improving community interaction. And that's because we see you as being an absolutely fundamental part of this, in conjunction with all the other things. But improving and further integrating with yourselves, I think, is going to be critical to this. I said earlier, when you can't change something unless you're measuring it, and the figures are going to become important and the data is going to become important, so you need to understand what you're measuring. And in conjunction with our colleagues in the OHCA and in the registry, we've pulled out a subset of patients that are, and this is an international norm. Any ambulance service around the world, and many of them do it, use this particular method. Cardiac arrest is a very heterogeneous group. Many are cardiac etiology, but you can have cardiac arrest from trauma, hanging, drowning, things like that. Cardiac arrests that are not bystander witnessed, someone who's been down for a number of hours, they are not someone you're going to have any prospect of a successful resuscitation, and so on and so forth. So you pick out the group that are amenable to a change in outcome if we change how we manage them. And it's known as the Utstein comparator group. And that's the basic. It's cardiac etiology, so we're excluding the trauma, the hangings, the drownings, only those cardiac arrests that are bystander witnessed, and only those cardiac arrests that have an initial shockable rhythm. Okay. Now you might say, well, isn't that just you're taking out a group that maybe might make you look good, or what are you saying that those that are excluded are not important? No, that's not the case. But being blunt about it, if a person is a cardiac arrest and is found 4 hours later, then we have no prospect of resuscitating that, and including that in our data set is meaningless. So this is the data group that we work off of. And again, as I say, this is a measure that is used right around the world. Just an example of from last year. So ambulance services, NHS ambulance trusts in England, not the UK, in England, and you can see a very wide variation in the figures. I don't know how well it projects, but it goes from low 30s to mid 60s with an average of 47%. We've set our target this year for 40% of raw scat ED of all the calls we do, and as then we planned as the years go by that we will up that. So in other words, increasing the target all the time is driving improvement. We're not going to stick with 40 and we get to 40, sit back. If we get to 40, then the following year it might be 42 or 44 or whatever, and we're going to keep pushing it and keeping the drive on so we can keep improving all the time. There's a number of areas that we need to focus on, but these are probably the 3 important ones, and I'm going to leave that one to last and spend most time on it, because I think that's the one that will probably be most of interest to this group. Just in terms of what we do when we get on scene first, right? So our actual clinical management. And there are many, many things that we plan on doing, but this is one of them. You're familiar with the Formula 1 pit crew. So vehicle arrives into the pit lane and in 8 seconds later leaves with 4 new tyres and a full tank of fuel. And the only reason that works is because that group of mechanics and engineers train relentlessly doing the same things all the time, so that they get very, very good at it. But they also do it in parallel. Everybody knows exactly what they have to do. They don't have to be told, and it all just happens. And that's the kind of paradigm that we need to happen in cardiac arrest. So when we have 2 paramedics on a call, or 2 paramedics and then an AP and a response car arrives, and then a second crew arrives, so now we have 5 people, or there's a CFR group there and then a paramedic crew arrive, that everybody just seamlessly works without having to wonder what will I do next, or what are you doing, and should we shock now, or it just needs to happen. So the whole concept of pit crew CPR is something we're going to introduce right across the service in the months and years ahead. And there are just some principles of it, of high performance CPR. Again, much of this won't be news to you, and I won't go through it in detail. But I think an important message, whether you're a community first responder, whether you're an advanced paramedic, whether you're a consultant in emergency medicine, if a patient is in cardiac arrest, the only things that are really going to make a difference and make any kind of meaningful difference to that patient is early, high-quality CPR and early defibrillation. And you can have all the bells and whistles and the gizmos and the drugs and all that, and at the end of the day, it's meaningless if you don't get early, good-quality CPR and early defibrillation. So I think that's a really important point to take away, because that's something, both of those are within the scope of everyone within this room. That's just an example of pit crew CPR about how we might train our staff in doing this. So, two people, two ambulance personnel on a call, and very clear then, even down to the point of where you sit or kneel or stand, and all that you do. And then two more people arrive. So now it changes. We've now got 4 people. So again, everybody needs to understand what they do. It's just an example of what we're talking about. In our control centre, again, hugely important in this, and as Martin mentioned, we've put an enormous amount of work and investment into completely revolutionising how we do 999 call taking and ambulance dispatch. It's been a very positive thing for the service, and we're nearly there. We're not quite there yet. We're nearly there, but we've, in a number of months' time, in 2 centres, in Tala in Dublin, which is a brand new building, brand new centre, and Ballyshannon and Donegal, we will be doing 999 call taking and ambulance dispatch for the entire country in 1 centre across 2 sites. When you consider 5-6 years ago, we had 13 ambulance control centres operating in a very fragmented, uncoordinated fashion. That's a huge improvement for us, but it's a huge platform then to allow us to push on and do new things and work better, and cardiac arrest is a particular one that we'll be looking at. So briefly, just some of the things we'll be doing. We'll be doing some targeted education for call takers and dispatchers on cardiac arrest recognition. And it might seem self-evident, but unless, in terms of receiving the 999 call, unless we identify that is a cardiac arrest, we're not going to be able to manage it as a cardiac arrest. And what catches us sometimes, I think, is agonal breathing. Because one of the questions that are asked by the call taker from the scripted algorithm is the patient breathing? And if there's any equivocation about that, or if the caller says yes, they're breathing, then we're not into that whole cardiac arrest space. So that's one example of where we'll be going. And what we'll be saying to people is, if you any doubt, it's an echo call. Treat it as a cardiac arrest. Okay? If you're wrong, no harm done. Because if it's tagged as an echo call, what that automatically means is we give pre-arrival instructions. So the caller is given instructions over the phone how to do CPR, and that's very, very effective. And I'm guessing that many of you have seen that. I'm guessing that many of you have come on a cardiac arrest and seen somebody doing CPR. I certainly have seen somebody doing CPR, being instructed how to do it by one of our call takers over the phone, and it works. It's very, very effective. We'll be doing automatic audit within our control center. All those cardiac arrest calls automatically will be tagged, audited, listened to by an auditor, and areas for improvement in terms of the call taking will be identified and in a constructive way fed back to our call taking staff so that we can up our game all the time and continuously strive to improve. There's a couple of things coming down the line that will help us in terms of the speed of how we handle these calls and the speed of our response. One is caller line identification. So next year, if you dial 999 from a landline, that landline will be automatically mapped to your location. So instead of us having to ask the caller, where are you? We'll know. We just have to verify that with them. So that'll cut a lot of time off and allow us to get into the real meat of the call. And postcodes, which the government are introducing next year, will be a hugely important, positive development for us as a service in being able to get our resources to where that patient is in a very speedy manner. One of the other things we'll be looking at is having a predetermined response, and fire services do this very well. They have what are called predetermined attendances for different types of incidents. So if they have a fire, there's a particular predetermined attendance. If it's a rescue situation, or, a car crash, a river rescue, whatever, they have predetermined attendance. We're going to be looking at that and having a predetermined attendance for cardiac arrests. And, is that five people? Is that five, to include CFRs, paramedics, advanced paramedics? We need to work through that, but it's something that we'll be looking at. Okay, community first responders, yourselves. Does that number mean anything to any of you? It's certainly a big part of my life. Unfortunately, it makes my head spin. Does anybody here believe in 8 minutes? Does anybody here not believe in 8 minutes as a quality measure of ambulance service provision? I certainly don't. I think I don't think I can tell you very definitively crude, no evidence for it. No scientific basis for it whatsoever, yet it is used continuously as a measure to determine if an ambulance service is working. And if you don't get this, then you've failed. So we can go to a call, we get there in 9 minutes, and we have failed, even though we have a really good outcome from it, or we can get there in 5 or 6 minutes and have a very poor outcome, and it's a success. And it's daft. But it's unfortunate, it's the world we live in. Why is 8 minutes meaningless? Okay, well, we're talking about cardiac arrest today, okay? So, again, you all know this, right? If I go down now, God forbid, although it would be a good place to go down, wouldn't it? If I go down, unless I get one of you to press on my chest and shock me in, 3-4 minutes, then the chances of me surviving start to diminish. So look at 8 minutes. We're now at a 20% survival chance. So why would we pick a time measure that equates to an 80% chance of me dying? And the reason we do is because, no one has the guts to say, well, actually, a meaningful response time target for cardiac arrest is probably 3 or 4 minutes. Because that, in the same way that 8 minutes is probably unachievable, particularly in any kind of a rural setting, 4 minutes is completely unachievable. When you consider it takes us probably 90 seconds to take the 999 call in the first place. So we're into fantasy world stuff at 8 minutes, okay? And I would say to you, and Martin's probably getting a pain in his chest now, but a meaningful cardiac arrest response time target would probably be 3 or 4 minutes. But we're never going to do that because it's unachievable. We're certainly, and the single biggest determinants of survival are early CPR, early defibrillation within 3 or 4 minutes at most, okay? If you don't get those within 3 or 4 minutes, game over, realistically. Are we going to get to you in 8 minutes, or in 3 or 4 minutes, with one of these? Probably not. That's certainly not going to be the answer, sexy and all as it is. What's the answer? It's that, you, and our call taker doing pre-arrival instructions. That's the answer, okay? That's community responder group in North Cork, place dear to my heart, okay? I was very privileged to be asked to the launch of that in Mallow, probably 18 months ago. And my next interaction with that group was at a cardiac arrest about 6 weeks ago, about 7 o'clock in the morning, and I was asked to respond to provide assistance to a crew on scene, and there was members of this group there on scene. So, John and others, if you're here, thanks for your help that morning. This works, okay? This works. You work. So, Martin mentioned these figures already. We have 111 of you integrated with National Ambulance Service. So what does integrated mean? Okay, community, and again, you know all of this, I'm sure, but just to run through it, I think it's helpful. Your community is geofenced. On the map, we put a circle around within which, if we get a cardiac arrest call, you will automatically be dispatched, okay? There is no human interaction required. The computer system does it. Once it's an echo call within your area, you get the text message and off you go. And that's fantastic, because that means you're going very, very quickly. And you're always going to get there before we will. We are sending, there's 2 ways of being dispatched. You can go as a CFR basic scheme, where you're going to echo calls only, right? Cardiac arrest and choking, or if you wish, and different groups have different views in it. You can go as a CFR enhanced group, which means you're going to cardiac arrest, choking, and you're also going to chest pain and stroke. All of those are based on the CFR, the cardiac first responder scope of practice. BLS, AED, fast recognition, aspirin administration. Martin stole my thunder. He mentioned all these figures already. I was going mad when I heard him say it. 135 CFR dispatches last month. 46% of all echo calls nationally got a CFR response. Okay, that's great, but we need more. We really need more, because we will never, ever, ever, ever get to those patients within 3 or 4 minutes without your assistance. What's particularly, I think, wonderful about this conference and CFR Ireland is, from our perspective, is we now have a single point of contact. We can interact with you as a community through CFR Ireland, and we're already starting to see the benefits from that. And I would see with the One Life project, which is something that we'll be working very hard on, that allows me to engage with you through David and Susan and John, and get you as a community integrated into the One Life project, so that together we can get more people surviving cardiac arrest. So, summary of the One Life project. As I say, lots and lots of thought went into it, and I need to pay huge credit to David Henley in particular, who really just took this from gestation and right up to where it is now, along with lots of help from many people, but a huge amount of effort on his part. Launched within the service last week. I would see 3, 4, 5 years before we'd see the fruits of it, but I would see you as a group as being absolutely critical. And what we'll get is, the last line is the most important, is we'll get more survivors from cardiac arrest in this country. I'm a great believer in the power of anecdote. So that's a gentleman called Michael who, and I have his permission to tell his story. He retired a couple of years ago, and as many people do, decided to improve his golf handicap. And on the 3rd fairway of the golf course in Bundoran, he had a cardiac arrest. One of his 3-ball or 4-ball, I think, was someone who was a member of a community responder group, I think, but certainly knew how to do CPR and did CPR. The golf club were one of the more enlightened ones. They had an AED, and it got out to him very quickly. We had an ambulance on scene very quickly, and where better to land a helicopter than a golf course. So he had a ROSC on scene, had a pulse back. Heli landed, flew him direct from the scene to PCI in Galway, flew over a number of hospitals. He arrested again in the aircraft, was successfully resuscitated, got to the cath lab, 3 stents, discharged home well after 3 days, and from what I understand is still doing well. This works, okay? This works. Just the last message to finish on, we're always looking for first responders. We're not fussy. We'll take anyone, okay? Genuinely interested in your thoughts on any of this. Unfortunately, I can't stay for most of the rest of the conference. I know Dave Henley will be here. He's certainly someone you could feed back to, or if anybody wants to make contact with me, always delighted to hear from you. Okay? Thanks very much.